There is a curriculum being taught in every interaction you have. You did not write it intentionally. Nobody sat you down and explained it, but it has been assembled quietly and consistently through every small decision you make about how to show up in the presence of other people. Every time you say yes when you mean no. Every time you apologize for something that was not your fault. Every time you swallow something that hurt, because addressing it felt like too much trouble. Every time you make yourself smaller than you actually are, to avoid taking up space that was always yours to occupy. You are teaching, and the people around you are learning, not maliciously, not consciously in most cases, but learning nonetheless, learning what they can expect from you, learning how you expect to be treated, learning the price of your presence, and whether it fluctuates based on their behavior or stays steady regardless of it. This is not about becoming harder. It is not about building walls or performing a toughness you do not feel. It is about something quieter and more difficult, and ultimately more powerful than any of that. It is about the texture of ordinary days, about the small, unremarkable, almost invisible decisions that accumulate into something unmistakable, into a person who is genuinely respected, not feared, not flattered, respected, in the way that lasts and does not require constant maintenance. Today we are going to look at 7 behaviors, none of them dramatic, none of them requiring you to become someone you are not, but all of them practiced with intention over time, capable of changing what the people in your life silently believe about your worth, because you have been teaching that lesson all along. The only question is whether you are ready to change what it says. Behavior 1. Keep your word to yourself. Before we talk about how the world treats you, we need to talk about how you treat yourself in private, because there is a version of you that has made hundreds of quiet commitments and broken most of them before the week was out. You know the ones. The morning practice you were going to start, the conversation you kept saying you would have, the thing you told yourself you would stop tolerating. Small promises, private ones, the kind no one else knows about, which is exactly why they matter so much. Epictetus built his entire philosophy around the relationship between your inner life and your outer one. He understood that self-mastery is not discipline for its own sake. It is the process of becoming a person whose interior world matches their exterior one. A person whose yes means yes and whose no means no, starting with the promises made in private where no one is watching. Here is what most people miss. Every time you break a quiet commitment to yourself, you are not just failing to complete a task. You are training your nervous system to believe that your word is approximate, that your intentions are tentative, that what you say you will do and what you actually do are 2 different categories. And that belief does not stay private. It seeps outward. People sense it in the most ordinary ways. They watch the gap between what you say and what you do. They notice, usually without being able to articulate why, whether you are someone who can be taken at their word. When you follow through on the small thing you told yourself you would do, the boundary you said you would hold, the standard you said you would maintain, you are not just completing a task. You are building evidence that you are someone who can be trusted, first by yourself, and then, almost automatically, by the people watching. Keep your word to yourself first. Everything else rests on this foundation. Honor it quietly, and something in you and around you becomes solid in a way that is very difficult to fake and very difficult to erode. Behavior 2. Stop over-explaining your decisions. Notice what happens the next time you decline something. Count the sentences that follow. In most people, there is a reason, and then a backup reason, and then a small apology wrapped around both, and then a reassurance that declining does not make them a difficult or unkind person. By the end, the no is buried so deeply under qualifications that it has almost ceased to exist. Over-explaining is one of the most common ways people signal, without realizing it, that they do not fully trust their own judgment. It is a request for approval dressed up as information, and the people on the receiving end, consciously or not, register exactly that. When you over-explain, you are communicating that your answer needs their acceptance to feel valid. You are handing them a small amount of authority over your choices, and over time, they begin to expect that authority. The Stoics valued brevity not as coldness, but as confidence. The clean edge of a complete sentence carries a different weight than the same sentence surrounded by disclaimers. The difference is not in the words. It is in what the words communicate about the person speaking them. Warmth and brevity can coexist without conflict. "I will not be able to make it, but I hope it goes well" is complete. It is kind. It is sufficient. The absence of 12 follow-up sentences is not rudeness. It is self-assurance in quiet clothing. Start noticing where you over-explain. You will find it is almost always in the places where you do not yet fully trust yourself to be enough without justification. That is the real work. Not crafting better explanations, but needing fewer of them. Because when you trust your own answer, the explanation becomes optional, and the people around you will begin to trust your answers too. Behavior 3. Let discomfort sit without rushing to fix it. Most people are frightened of an unresolved moment. Silence falls in a conversation and they fill it immediately. Someone seems upset, and they move to smooth it over before understanding whether smoothing it over is even appropriate. There is tension, and they rush toward resolution, not because the situation is genuinely resolved, but because the discomfort of waiting feels unbearable. So they patch things. They apologize when they are not wrong. They soften truths that needed to land. They chase the feeling of everything being okay rather than the reality of it. And in doing so, they teach the people around them something important. Tension will always be relieved, quickly, regardless of who caused it. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the discipline of not acting from anxiety, of responding to what actually requires a response, not simply to what feels urgent. Discomfort almost always falls in the second category. It feels urgent. It rarely is. Learning to let a difficult moment exist without immediately trying to dissolve it is one of the quietest forms of self-respect available to you. It communicates that you are not so fragile that every sharp edge needs to be smoothed before you can function, that your calm is real and not a performance dependent on everyone around you being comfortable. When you stop reflexively soothing every tense moment, something shifts in your relationships. People learn that the dynamic between you will not always bend in their direction simply because the atmosphere grew heavy. They learn that you can hold difficulty without dissolving. That is not toughness performed for effect. That is steadiness. And steadiness in a world where most people are managing their own discomfort constantly is one of the rarest and most respected qualities a person can carry. Behavior 4. Receive compliments without deflecting. Someone tells you that you did something well, and before they have finished the sentence, you are already moving to make it smaller. "Oh, it was nothing. Anyone could have done it. I actually almost made a complete mess of it." You laugh a little. You redirect. You return the compliment immediately to avoid sitting in it. It feels like modesty. It is rarely just modesty. More often, deflecting a compliment is a quiet rejection of the person offering it, as if their positive experience of your work or your presence cannot quite be trusted, as if their assessment needs to be corrected. And underneath that correction is a belief that is worth examining. The belief that receiving good things graciously is somehow dangerous. That agreeing with someone who sees your worth is arrogant or presumptuous. Here is what that behavior teaches the people around you. The way you receive a compliment tells them how you see yourself, and how you see yourself, they gradually come to mirror. If you consistently dismiss their positive assessments, they begin, slowly and subtly, to question those assessments too. Not because they decided to, because you kept correcting them. Receiving well is a skill. It is not about becoming someone who basks in praise or seeks it out. It is about learning to let something good simply land. Thank you. That means a lot. Full stop. No hedge. No immediate self-deprecation. No pivot to something smaller. Just a clean, open receipt. The 2 seconds where you allow yourself to be seen as capable, as worthy, as someone who belongs in the good moments. That practice, repeated quietly over time, tells a different story about who you are, one that is far more accurate than the story your deflections have been telling. Behavior 5. Stop shrinking in rooms. You know what shrinking looks like. You have done it. Almost everyone has. It is sitting at the edge of a table instead of pulling your chair in. It is lowering your voice mid-sentence because you suddenly became uncertain your thought was worth its full volume. It is preemptively apologizing for taking up space before anyone has suggested you should not. It is making yourself smaller, physically, verbally, energetically, as a kind of social insurance policy. A way of saying before anyone else can, I will not ask for more than I am offered. The problem is that people tend to give you exactly as much as you claim. Body language communicates whether you intend it to or not. When you walk into a room like you are not entirely sure you belong there, the room tends to agree. Not from cruelty, from taking your cue. You have already told them, through every contracted gesture and apologetic posture, what to believe about your presence. Seneca wrote about the importance of simply being, of not constantly performing yourself for the approval of others. There is something genuinely freeing in that idea. To stop negotiating your right to occupy the space you are in, to arrive somewhere and simply allow yourself to be there without editorializing it downward. Stopping this does not require becoming loud. The overcorrection of performed confidence reads as its own kind of insecurity, just louder. What genuinely respected people tend to do is simpler. They walk in, they sit down, they speak at their actual volume. They let their presence be what it is without qualifying it downward before anyone has asked them to. The room does not need your apology for being in it. The conversation does not need you to arrive already smaller than you are. Take up the space that was always yours. It was never being withheld from you. Behavior 6. End what has already ended. Some things are over long before we let them go. The friendship that runs entirely on obligation and shared history, with nothing real being exchanged anymore. The role you have outgrown but keep showing up to play. The dynamic that drained to empty somewhere in the middle distance, and yet here you are, still maintaining it, still performing it, still treating the ghost of it as though it owes you something for your patience. Holding on to things that have already ended is not loyalty. It is a quiet form of self-abandonment, and it teaches the people in your life, and the ones watching from the edges, that you will stay past the point of reason, that your presence is not something to be cherished, but something that can be assumed, that you do not leave. Because leaving requires a level of self-regard you have not yet fully claimed. There is a kind of courage in ending things cleanly, not dramatically. You do not need to make speeches or create moments. Quiet endings are often the most dignified. A conversation that simply becomes shorter. A presence that gradually withdraws. An internal decision made without announcement. This is no longer mine to carry. Epictetus taught that we must distinguish between what is ours and what is not. Suffering over what you cannot change is not nobility. It is a choice to remain in difficulty that could be left. When you begin releasing what no longer serves you, actually releasing it rather than just thinking about it, you communicate something essential about your own value. You show that your time, your energy, and your emotional presence are finite, valuable, and directed toward where they are genuinely received. End what has ended. Not with bitterness, not with ceremony, with the quiet dignity of someone who has finally decided that their presence deserves to be somewhere it actually matters. Behavior 7. Respond rather than react. Someone says something that gets under your skin. Your pulse lifts, your thoughts sharpen. Every part of you wants to answer immediately, to match the energy, to defend yourself, to correct the record, to let them know exactly what you think before the moment passes. That impulse is human. It is nearly universal, and acting on it every time is one of the quietest ways a person hands their power to whoever just triggered them. Reacting is automatic. It says whatever just happened has control over me right now. Responding is deliberate. It says I heard you, and I will engage with you on my terms. The difference in any given moment might look like nothing more than a breath. A pause. A second where you choose not to immediately fill the air with the first thing that arrived. But that pause is doing something significant. It is the space where your considered self gets to arrive before your reactive self has already made decisions you will need to explain later. Epictetus built nearly his entire philosophy around this gap. Between what happens to you and what you choose to do about it lives a space of freedom. That space is where your character is actually formed, where your worth is practiced, not declared. Most people never find that space because they are moving too fast. They react and then explain the reaction, and sometimes regret both. When you respond with even a fraction of intention, when you pause for just long enough to choose rather than just discharge, you communicate something that cannot be faked. Self-possession. And self-possession draws respect, not because it is performed, but because it is real. You will not get it right every time. The reactive moment will still arrive and sometimes it will win. But the practice, the returning again and again to that small pause, is where your worth gets written in the only language that actually convinces people. The language of consistent behavior over time. Closing 7 behaviors, none of them dramatic, none of them requiring you to reinvent who you are or announce a new version of yourself to anyone. That is what makes this harder than it first appears, and more durable than anything dramatic could ever be. There is no single turning point. No morning you wake up and decide to be different and immediately become it. The change is slower than that, and quieter, and once it begins, more lasting than any single gesture could produce. Because this is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming more precisely yourself, the version of you that keeps its word. That speaks without excessive apology. That can sit in discomfort without rushing to dissolve it. That receives good things with steadiness. That takes up the space it is owed. That releases what is finished. That chooses response over reaction. That person does not announce themselves. They do not need to. What you have seen across all 7 of these behaviors is what self-worth looks like when it is lived rather than performed. It is not loud. It is not a declaration. It is a quiet, consistent pattern of behavior that communicates without a single speech. I know what I bring. I know what I deserve, and I will treat myself accordingly until the world learns to do the same. And here is the part that matters most. You cannot force other people to value you. You cannot demand the respect that should have always been given. But you can make it very difficult for anyone to believe that you do not value yourself. When the behaviors are consistent enough, long enough, the message becomes impossible to misread. So choose one. Not all 7, just one. The one that already knows it is the place you most need to start. Practice it deliberately until it stops being something you do and starts being something you are. You have been teaching people your worth all along. The only question now is what lesson you want them to learn. If something in this video quietly shifted something in you, leave a comment below. Just 3 words. I know my worth. No explanation needed. No justification required. Subscribe to Stoic Journal and turn on the bell. Every week there is content like this for people who are learning to carry themselves differently. Until next time, keep your word, take up your space, and walk steady.